when my only daughter, Elise, turned to me in our living room and said, "You'll either serve my husband or get out of my house." Her words cut sharper than any blade. For years, I had bent over backwards to keep the peace, swallowing my pride, doing favors without complaint, even in moments when my dignity screamed for me to say no. But that day, something inside me shifted. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I simply looked at her for a long moment, memorizing the coldness in her eyes. Then I walked quietly to my bedroom, pulled out the suitcase that had been collecting dust on my closet shelf for years, and began to pack. She stood there, waiting for me to break. She thought this was like every other argument, that I would eventually shuffle back in, apologize, and promise to do better. But she didn't understand. This was the moment I stopped playing my assigned role in their little play. The February air outside was biting as I stepped off the porch, suitcase in hand. But the cold in my chest was far deeper. I didn't look back. I didn't check to see if they were watching me leave. A week later, I would see 22 missed calls on my phone. Calls that would mark the beginning of their unraveling. The spark that lit this fire had come just days earlier. I had returned from the market, grocery bags digging deep into my palms, leaving red marks. The late afternoon sunlight streamed to the curtains, warm and golden, but it didn't feel welcoming. Inside, Darren, my son-in-law, sat in my leather recliner, the last gift Marlene had given me before cancer took her. His feet were up, beard dangling from his hand, eyes fixed on the TV. Without glancing at me, he said, "Grab me another beer. Not the cheap kind, the imports I like." That was the moment my patience finally snapped. I had bought those imported beers for Darren earlier that week, even though I never drank beer myself. It wasn't because I wanted to, it was because Elise had told me he liked them. I'd used my own pension money to get a brand I knew he'd never buy with his paycheck. "Darren," I just walked in the door. I said, still holding the grocery bags, "Let me put these away first." His eyes didn't leave the television. "You're already standing. Don't make this harder than it has to be. This is my house." I reminded him. That's when he finally looked at me. That infuriating, condescending smirk I'd seen more times than I could count. Slowly, he swung his feet down from the recliner, the thud of his boots on the floor deliberate, almost threatening. He stood, towering over me, using his size like a weapon. "Funny," he said, "because Elise and I live here. We pay the bills." I felt a muscle twitch in my jaw. "With my money..." "Details," he shrugged, taking a casual sip of his beer. Then he stepped closer, so close I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Look, Edgar, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you want to keep living here, you follow my rules. No questions, no attitude." The kitchen door opened and Elise walked in. Her hair was tied back messily, a dish towel draped over one shoulder. She glanced between us. "What's going on?" "Your father's making a big deal out of nothing," Darren said, eyes still locked on me. "I asked for a beer, and he's acting like it's some federal offense." Elise's gaze hardened. "Dad, just get in the beer. It's not worth fighting over." I looked from her to Darren, then back again. "No," I said evenly. "It's worth more than you think." And right then I decided I was leaving. Elise blinked at me, confused, as if she couldn't quite process what I just said. She expected me to sigh, mumble something about being tired, and shuffle into the kitchen like a scolded child. But I turned my back and walked down the hallway without another word. The grocery bag stayed by the door, the milk carton sweating, the bread slowly flattening under its own weight. In my bedroom, I stood for a moment, scanning the room I had called mine for years, but which had never truly felt like home since Marlene passed. My gaze fell on the top shelf of the closet. I reached up and pulled down the dark blue suitcase, the one Marlene and I had bought for a trip to the Grand Canyon we never took. It had been sitting there ever since, holding the dust of forgotten plans. I set it on the bed and unzipped it slowly, the sound strangely final. I didn't throw clothes in carelessly. I folded them with precision, the same way I had folded shirts when we were newlyweds packing for weekend getaways. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, a sweater for the cold evenings, socks and undergarments, my reading glasses, and my medications. My leather-bound journal went in next, pages filled with notes, expenses, and thoughts I'd never shared. Finally, I took Marlene's framed photograph from a nightstand. She was smiling in it, her eyes catching the light in a way that made them look almost alive. I wrapped it in tissue paper and slid it carefully into a side pocket. From the living room, Darren's voice carried, low, irritated, urgent. Elise's voice was softer, hesitant. They were already planning how to manage me, assuming I'd cave once I cooled down. When I walked back down the hallway, suitcase in hand, Darren was sitting upright now, watching me. Elise stood with her arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. Neither of them tried to stop me. The cold air outside felt sharper than I remembered, a biting wind sweeping across the porch as if to urge me forward. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle and took each step slowly, deliberately. My old silver sedan sat in the driveway, the same car I'd driven for over a decade. It had never let me down, even when the people I trusted most had. I opened the trunk and set the suitcase inside, the thud echoing like the closing of a chapter. Sliding into the driver's seat, I paused for a moment, staring at the steering wheel. In the past, I would have hesitated, telling myself maybe this can still be fixed. But the decision had already rooted itself deep in me. There would be no turning back this time. The engine started on the first try, a comforting purr. I didn't look at the house as I reversed down the driveway. I didn't check the windows to see if Elise or Darren were watching me go. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. The drive to the Maplewood Motel took 30 minutes, winding past streets lined with bare winter trees. My mind wandered over years of memories and sacrifices. The $40,000 a year I paid for Elise's private college, the $25,000 I covered for her wedding when Darren's family couldn't, the $80,000 I pulled from my retirement savings for the down payment on their home. Add to that the mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, car insurance, all given freely, without a single request for repayment. Every dollar had been offered with love. Every sacrifice made with the thought, that's what fathers do. That's what Marlene would have wanted. The motel was nothing fancy, a low, L-shaped building with a flickering neon sign. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a desk, a single chair, and a thin curtain over the window. When I closed the door behind me, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy, resentful quiet of my daughter's house. It was the kind of quiet that lets you breathe. Morning crept into the room through the thin motel curtains, casting pale light over the desk in the corner. The hum of the heater was the only sound. I poured myself a mug of instant coffee from the small kettle, the bitter scent filling the air, and sat down with a pen and stack of papers. Laid out before me was my life on paper. Bank statements, insurance policies, credit card accounts, a spreadsheet I had made months ago when I first began to suspect this living arrangement would end badly. Every entry told the same story. Year after year, my money flowing into their lives, while mine quietly emptied. I started with the biggest weight, the mortgage, after navigating the endless labyrinth of the bank's automated menu. A young woman with a polite voice finally answered. I need to cancel an automatic payment. I told her. For which account, she asked. Property at 114 Westbrook Drive, account ending in 1726. A pause and, Sir, this payment has been active for over 5 years. Are you certain you want to stop it? I'm certain. Cancel it today. Next was my auto insurance provider. For 3 years, Darren's truck and Elise's sedan had been covered under my policy. Remove both vehicles, I said, effective immediately. Then came the credit cards. Elise had been an authorized user on 3 accounts, a Visa, a MasterCard, and a department store card she loved to use for emergencies that often looked like new shoes and expensive gadgets. Please remove her access, I told each representative. With each call, something loosened in my chest. It wasn't joy. There's nothing joyful about dismantling years of generosity, but it was liberation. By the time I set the phone down, the papers on my desk were no longer a list of burdens. They were proof that, for the first time in years, I was reclaiming my life. By noon, the list was complete. Mortgage payment, gone. Car insurance for vehicles I didn't drive, gone. Credit card access, revoked. Utilities, stripped from my accounts. But there was more to do. I called my attorney's office and scheduled an appointment for the following week. Elise had been the sole beneficiary of since Marlene's passing. That would change. My life insurance policy, worth $120,000, had been intended to protect her future. Now, it would go to causes that actually understood sacrifice, perhaps a veterans housing project or a scholarship fund in Marlene's name. Every action was deliberate, lawful, and documented. I wanted no opportunity for anyone to claim that my decisions had been rash or driven by spite. The truth was simpler. I was finally refusing to be used. When I set the pen down, I realized my hands were trembling. It wasn't fear. It was a strange, almost foreign sensation of freedom. I had spent years entangled in obligations I mistook for love, convinced that giving more was the same as caring more. But love without respect is just exploitation with a prettier name. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the small motel room around me. The walls were plain, the furniture worn, but there was a lightness in the air I hadn't felt in years. Through the window, I watched an elderly couple loading luggage into a dusty minivan. They moved easily around each other, handing off bags without words, smiling at some private joke. Marlene and I had been like that once, partners who looked out for one another. I turned away from the window. That part of my life was over. What came next would be something entirely new. For 2 days after I cut the financial cords, my phone sat silent on the motel desk. The stillness was almost unnerving, like standing in a room just before a storm breaks. I knew they'd notice soon enough, and when they did, the calls would come. By Wednesday morning, the screen lit up with 12 missed calls. By Friday, that number had grown to 22. I listened to the voicemails in the order they came. The first few were deceptively calm. Elise's voice was measured, almost casual, as she asked if there had been a banking error with the mortgage. Darren's tone was mildly annoyed, telling me the insurance on his truck had lapsed and asking what I was playing at. But as the days passed, the edge in their voices sharpened. Elise's messages turned frantic, her words tumbling over each other as she explained the bank's warning. If the full mortgage payment didn't arrive by Friday, they would begin foreclosure proceedings. Darren's messages grew harsher. "You're making us look like deadbeats," he barked in one. In another, he accused me of deliberately trying to humiliate them in front of friends and neighbors. The final few messages were tinged with desperation. Elise promised they'd work something out if I called her back. Darren tried a softer approach, claiming he might have been too harsh and suggesting we start over. I deleted each message without responding. I wasn't interested in apologies born from panic. It struck me, listening to progression, how quickly entitlement can turn to desperation when the tap runs dry. For years, I had been their safety net. Now, with one decision, I had let them fall, and they were scrambling not to take responsibility, but to find another way to land softly. Saturday morning, a heavy knock rattled the motel door. I paused mid-sip of coffee, setting the mug down on the desk. My gut told me who it was before I even moved. Peering through the peephole, I saw them both, Elise in a rumpled gray sweater, her hair pulled back carelessly, and Darren standing slightly behind her, hands stuffed into the pockets of his work jacket. His expression was tight, his eyes scanning the corridor like he was measuring the distance between pride and desperation. I opened the door, but made no move to invite them inside. "Dad, we need to talk," Elise began, her voice thin and frayed. "About what?" I asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. Darren stepped forward. "About the fact that you're trying to ruin our lives over some stupid argument about beer." I almost laughed, but my voice stayed even. "I'm not ruining anything. I've just decided I'm not going to pay for your lives anymore." "You can't just stop paying the mortgage," Darren snapped, his voice rising. "It's my house," I replied, meeting his glare without flinching. "You were guests." That landed like a slap. Elise's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I said quietly but firmly, "and I believed you." For a long moment, None of us spoke. The hum of a distant vending machine was the only sound. Darren's jaw tightened. He wanted to keep arguing, but the weight in the air told him I wasn't going to bend. He glanced at Elise. She lowered her eyes. Without another word, they both stepped back. I shut the door with a soft click, locking it behind me. My heart was steady, my hands still. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Darren lingered on the other side of the door for a few seconds after I closed it, his shadow shifting beneath the crack at the bottom. I half expected him to knock again, to unleash the temper I'd seen so many times before. Instead, there was a sharp exhale, footsteps, and then silence. When I stepped to the window, I saw them walking toward their car. Elise's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her head bent slightly forward, as if trying to fold into herself. Darren walked beside her with the stiff gait of a man, holding in more words than he dared to speak. I could have let that moment soften me. I could have told myself that maybe this confrontation was enough to change them. But the truth was, it wasn't about one moment. It was about years of them taking, years of me giving, and the slow erosion of respect that came with it. I returned to the desk, opened my letter journal, and made a new list. It wasn't financial this time. It was strategic. Every entry was about taking back control in ways they couldn't undo, secure my home legally, preventing them from finding new ways to tie my name to their debts, and making sure that if they wanted to rebuild their lives, they would have to do it without leaning on me. My pen scratched steadily across the paper. There was a certain satisfaction in the sound, deliberate, measured, and irreversible. When I finally set the pen down, I leaned back in a chair and stared at the closed motel door. I had walked away from them once this week. If it came to it, I was ready to walk away again, for good this time, after they left. The room felt even quieter than before, the kind of silence that makes you hear the hum of the light fixture and the faint tick of the wall clock. I stayed seated at the desk, staring at my notes, letting the stillness settle over me like a heavy coat. The last week had been about reclaiming my finances, cutting off every automatic payment, every obligation, every quiet drain that I had allowed for too long. But money was only part of it. If I was going to protect myself, I needed to reclaim my home, not just in practice, but in law. I opened my laptop and began reviewing property records, tax receipts, and old mortgage documents. Every sheet bore my name. No co-signers. No secondary owners. Just me. That house wasn't theirs. Not legally, not financially, not in any way that mattered. Still, I knew Darren well enough to understand how dangerous a desperate man can be. He might try something reckless, a fraudulent loan, a claim of partial ownership, maybe even a kind of legal maneuver people whisper about in small towns. Squatters' rights. The idea made my jaw clench. I wasn't about to let years of hard work be stolen by entitlement wrapped in charm. I began drafting a list of calls to make first thing Monday morning. The county clerk's office, a lawyer specializing in real estate disputes, and even a few trusted contacts at the bank who owed me favors for my years managing client accounts. If Darren thought this was just a petty family feud, he was about to learn it was a war I intended to win, fought with paperwork, signatures, and the full weight of the law. I closed my notebook and sat back, feeling that quiet resolve settling again. This wasn't just about walking away anymore. It was about making sure they could never drag me back. Sunday morning, I decided to clear my head. The four walls of the motel room were starting to feel closer each day, so I buttoned my coat and walked into town. The air was sharp, the kind that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. I ended up at the Lantern Cafe, a place Marlene and I used to visit on quiet afternoons. The bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside, and the scent of fresh coffee wrapped around me like a familiar embrace. I had just settled into a corner booth with a steaming mug when I heard a voice I hadn't expected. Edgar Whitman. Well, I'll be damned. I looked up to see Paul Henderson, an old colleague from my banking days. He was holding a folded newspaper and wearing the same slightly mischievous grin I remembered. "Paul," I said, standing to shake his hand. "It's been a long time." He slid into the booth without waiting for an invitation. "Heard you've been staying at the Maplewood. Everything all right?" I hesitated. Paul was trustworthy, but he was also deeply rooted in the local grapevine. I didn't need my personal affairs become the morning headline in this small town. Just needed some space. I said carefully. Paul studied me over the rim of his coffee. Funny thing, your son-in-law was in the bank a while back. Tried to get a $50,000 home equity loan. My coffee froze halfway to my lips. On my house. Yep. Brought in paperwork and everything. Looked official at first glance. But when we ran the title search, it was all in your name. No co-signers. The documents he brought were forged. Edgar. A slow, cold burn started in my chest. Darren's entitlement hadn't just been about comfort. It had been calculated theft. Paul leaned in, lowering his voice even though the cafe's background chatter made eavesdropping impossible. We flagged the application immediately. No money changed hands. So legally it was a gray area. But make no mistake, Edgar, it wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I set my coffee cup down carefully, my mind churning. All those dinners where Darren had complained about money. All those times he'd implied they were barely getting by. And all the while, he'd been quietly plotting to use my house as collateral for a loan I knew he had no means to repay. What was he going to use the money for? I asked. Paul's mouth tightened. Rumor is he's in deep at the Silver Creek Casino. Poker mostly. I've heard numbers anywhere between 15 and 20,000. The air in the cafe seemed to grow heavier. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the kind of man Darren really was. The life he was dragging my daughter into and the risks he was willing to take was something I'd worked for my entire life. Paul must have seen the shift in my expression. Be careful, he warned. A man willing to forge documents to steal from family isn't likely to stop there. And if the gambling debts are real, he's running out of time to make them right. I nodded slowly, my mind already spinning with the next steps. Thanks, Paul. You've told me more than you know. We parted ways outside the cafe, the cold air snapping against my face. As I walked back toward the motel, the betrayal settled deeper. Darren hadn't just been disrespectful. He'd been patient, waiting for the right moment to strip away what little I had left. That patience ended now. By the time I reached the motel, the sting of Paul's revelation had hardened into resolve. If Darren thought he could turn my generosity into a stepping stone for theft, then it was time to involve people who could do more than just listen. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed in years. Detective Raymond Holt. We'd served together on the town's housing committee years back, and I knew him to be both thorough and unshakable. If anyone could confirm what Paul had told me and dig deeper, it was him. Edgar, he greeted when he answered, his voice steady as ever. Haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on? I didn't waste time. I laid it all out. The ultimatum in my own home, my quiet departure, the financial ties I'd cut, and Paul's revelation about the forged loan documents. Raymond listened without interrupting, the faint sound of pen scratching against paper on his end. When I finished, there was a short pause. Your son-in-law's name is Darren Hale, right? That's right. I know the name, he said. Silver Creek Casino keeps detailed records for regulars. And Darren's been a regular. Higher stakes lately, too. From what I've heard, he owes somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20,000. Some to legitimate lenders. Some to people who don't go through the courts to collect. I exhaled slowly. So the forged loan, it was to cover gambling debts? Most likely. And Edgar, people in that position get desperate. If you've already cut him off financially, you can expect him to escalate. His words weren't a warning. They were a guarantee. Then I need to protect myself before that happens, I said, legally and permanently. Raymond's reply was simple. Come down to the station tomorrow. Bring any documentation you have. We'll start there. The next morning, I arrive at the police station with a folder tucked under my arm, property deeds, bank statements, and a neatly typed timeline of the last few weeks. The station smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the kind of scent that makes you feel both uneasy and oddly safe. Detective Holt met me in the lobby and led me to his office, a cramped room lined with filing cabinets. Let's start with your property, he said, pulling a legal pad toward him. I handed over the deed to my house. My name's the only one on it. Always has been. Darren and Elise have been living there rent-free for 3 years. Holt scanned the document, nodding. That's good. It makes an eviction much cleaner. The word eviction felt heavy, but also necessary. He explained the process step by step, filing the notice with the county clerk, allowing a 30-day period for them to vacate, and, if necessary, having the sheriff enforce it. You should also consider a restraining order, Holt added, looking at me over the top of his glasses. Given the financial fraud attempt and the debt situation, Darren's likely come at you directly. Maybe even show up here at the motel. I thought about the knock on my door last week, the way Darren had leaned forward just enough to invade my space. I think you're right, I said. By the time I left the station, the eviction paperwork was filed. Holt promised to fast-track the restraining order request. Given the circumstances, outside, the air was brisk, the sky washed in pale winter light. I stood on the station steps for a moment, watching traffic drift by. Filing those papers wasn't the end, not by a long shot, but it was the first time in weeks I felt the scales tip in my favor. Darren had been playing a long game. Now, so was I. The following afternoon, Detective Holt called to say the restraining order had been approved. It's effective immediately, he told me. Darren can't come within 500 feet of you, your home, or any place you're staying. If he violates it, you call us, and we'll have him in custody. I thanked him, but even after I hung up, the weight of it lingered. A restraining order was just words on paper unless the other person respected the law. And I knew Darren's respect for boundaries was non-existent. I spent the rest of the day making quiet, strategic moves. I contacted every creditor I knew Darren owed money to, not to pay a cent, but to correct his false claims about my address. He doesn't live here anymore, I told them. He has no legal claim to my property. You'll need to contact him directly. Each conversation was brief, factual, and left no doubt about where I stood. That evening, as the motel's neon sign flickered outside my window, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over, old man. I stared at the words for a moment, feeling the slow burn of anger rise in me. Then I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Holt with short message. Evidence. Possible violation of restraining order. His reply came within minutes. Got it. Keep everything he sends. It wasn't fear that settled over me as I put the phone down. It was something colder, harder. Darren wasn't just fighting for access to my money anymore. He was fighting to keep the illusion of control over me alive. But with every document I filed and every fact I locked into place, that illusion was crumbling. He was running out of moves. 3 days passed without incident. No knocks on the motel door. No strange cars idling outside. No texts from unknown numbers. It was the kind of quiet that made you start questioning whether the storm had really passed, or if it was simply circling back around. On the 4th day, I got my answer. It was late afternoon, the golden winter light spilling across the parking lot. I had just stepped outside to stretch my legs when a familiar figure emerged from a dark blue sedan. It wasn't Darren. It was Elise. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in spirit. Her coat was buttoned unevenly, and her eyes were rimmed with red, as if she hadn't slept. She hesitated halfway across the lot, then approached slowly, her hands stuffed deep into her pockets. "Dad," she said quietly when she reached me. "Elise?" I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm not here to fight," she began. I need to understand why you're doing this. Why now?" The question might have sounded innocent, if not for the faint tremor in her voice. The kind that comes when you already know the answer, but hope to hear something else. I told her the truth. How I'd spent years giving without ever being given respect in return. How her husband had tried to forge documents to take out a loan against my house. How I'd learned about the gambling debts and the lies. Her face went pale. "I didn't know," she whispered. I wanted to believe her, but I'd learned that wanting to believe someone and being able to trust them were two very different things. "Elise," I said softly, "it's time for you to choose which side of this you're on." Elise stood frozen for a moment, as if my words had pinned her in place. The wind tugged at her hair, but she didn't seem to notice. "I swear to you, I didn't know about the loan," she said finally. And the gambling, I knew he played sometimes, but I thought it was just with friends. I didn't know it was this bad. I studied her face, looking for the tells I'd learned to read when she was a little girl. The tiny twitch in her left eyebrow when she was hiding something, the way her voice would drop at the end of a lie. But this time, she looked raw, almost broken. Then why? I asked, "Did you stand there that day and let him talk to me the way he did? Why didn't you tell him to stop?" Her eyes glistened and she looked away, because I didn't want to lose him. The words hit harder than I expected. It was the same choice she'd been making for years. Loyalty to the man who took and took, instead of the father who had given her everything. "Elise," I said quietly, "I've spent too many years paying for other people's comfort while watching my own life shrink. I'm not doing it anymore. If you want to save your marriage, that's your choice. But you won't save it with my money or my home." She nodded slowly, biting her lip as if holding back a flood of words she wasn't ready to release. Then, without another glance, she turned and walked back to the sedan. I stood there until the car disappeared from sight, the winter air biting at my skin. I didn't know if I just closed the door on my daughter forever, or finally given her the key to free herself. The day after Lisa's visit, I found an envelope slid under my motel door. There was no name on the front, no return address, just my name in block letters. For a moment, I considered leaving it untouched, but curiosity has a way of cutting through caution. So I picked it up and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a bank withdrawal slip for $7,500, dated 2 weeks ago. The account holder's name was Darren Hale. At the bottom, in hurried handwriting, were the words, "This is where your mortgage payments went." I sat down on the bed, the slip trembling between my fingers. Whoever left it had gone out of their way to connect the dots for me. My best guess? Elise. If she truly hadn't known before, she knew now. And this was her way of showing me that my decision to cut them off had been justified. Still, it left me with more questions than answers. If Darren had pulled that much cash before I stopped the payments, then the money hadn't been going toward the house for a while, which meant he'd been deceiving both Elise and me, living under my roof while letting the debt creep toward foreclosure. I slid the withdrawal slip into my leather journal, in the section where I kept evidence for Holt. This wasn't just about proving Darren's intent anymore. It was about building an airtight case, so he couldn't wriggle free with smooth talk and half-truths. That night, I locked the motel door twice and kept the withdrawal slip within reach. If Darren realized Elise had turned on him, things could get ugly fast. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting her, too, whether she realized it or not. It was close to midnight when I heard the sound, a low, deliberate knock at the motel door. Not the hurried rap of someone in distress, but the slow, steady rhythm of a person who wanted to be heard and feared. I didn't move right away. My eyes went to the clock, then to the shadow stretching under the door. The figure outside wasn't pacing, wasn't shifting from foot to foot, just standing there, waiting. I reached for my phone and sent a quick text to Detective Holt. "Someone's at my door, not answering. Room 12. Then I stayed silent. After a minute, the knocking stopped. A faint rustle followed, like paper sliding across the floor. I waited until I heard footsteps retreat down the walkway, then the muffled sound of a car starting in the distance. When I finally opened the door, the parking lot was empty. At my feet lay another envelope. This one was heavier. I carried it inside and locked the door again before opening it. Inside were 5 poker chips, each stamped with a logo of Silver Creek Casino, $1,000 apiece. On top of them was a single note. "You don't understand who you're dealing with. The handwriting wasn't Darren's." That alone made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was someone else, someone outside the circle, stepping into the fight. I placed the chips in a small evidence bag I'd brought from Holt's office and tucked them into my suitcase. Then I pulled the chair from the desk and wedged it under the door handle. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound, the hum of the heater, the groan of pipes, felt like a warning that the line I'd drawn was now part of a much bigger battlefield. At sunrise, I called Holt and told him about the envelope and the poker chips. His voice hardened instantly. "Don't touch them any more than you have to. I'll send an officer to collect them." While I waited, I sat at the small desk, spreading out everything I'd gathered. The forged loan attempt, the withdrawal slip Elise had left me, and now the casino chips with that chilling note. The picture was starting to form, but it wasn't a family portrait anymore. This was organized, debt owed to people who played by their own rules, where intimidation was a standard form of communication. If Darren was deep enough in, these weren't just casual poker nights gone wrong. These were markers of ownership, and he was offering up my property, my name, as collateral to buy himself time. The knock at the door that morning was sharper than the one the night before. This time, it was Officer Reynolds, a younger cop with steady eyes and a calm demeanor. He took the evidence bag without asking questions, then glanced toward the parking lot. "You seen anyone hanging around?" "Not since last night," I replied. He nodded. "We'll run the casino chips. See if they've been linked to any ongoing cases. In the meantime, keep your head down. If they think you're going to hand over what Darren owes, they'll push harder." After he left, I closed my notebook and stared out the window. Darren had always been reckless, but this was different. This was a kind of reckless that spilled into other people's lives and burned everything it touched. For years, I'd been his shield. Now, the shield was gone, and the arrows were finally hitting their true target. I wasn't sure if that made me safer or next in line. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed her name, Elise. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, before finally answering. Her voice came out in a rush. "Dad, you have to get out of that motel." My grip on the phone tightened. "Why?" I can't say much, but Darren's been talking to people. The wrong people. He told them you got cash somewhere, that you're holding on to money he needs to settle things. They think you're an easy mark. Her words trembled. "Please, just go somewhere else. Somewhere they can't find you." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the closed door. "Elise, I'm not running from this. I'm protecting myself, but I'm not hiding." "You don't understand," she whispered. "These people aren't like the police or the bank. They won't wait for papers and court dates. They'll just show up." For a moment, I almost told her about the envelope and the chips, but I stopped myself. If she didn't already know how close this danger was, telling her would only put her in deeper. Instead, I asked, "Where's Darren right now?" There was a pause, and "I don't know. He's been gone since yesterday." He didn't say where he was going, just that he'd fix things. I closed my eyes, a cold certainty settling in. Darren's version of fixing things usually involved making a bigger mess. And now, the mess was circling both of us. "Elise," I said slowly, "you need to decide if you're going to keep standing beside him when this blows up, or if you're going to step away before it does." She didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "I'll call you when I can." The line went dead, but the silence that followed was louder than her words. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. The parking lot seemed too quiet, the hum of the neon sign outside too steady, like the calm before someone decides to move in. Around 10 p.m., I pulled the blinds just enough to see without being seen. That's when I noticed it. A black SUV parked 2 spaces away, its engine off, windows tinted so dark they swallowed the reflection of the streetlights. It hadn't been there when I got back from dinner. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The SUV didn't move. Finally, I grabbed my phone and called Holt. "I think I've got company," I told him, keeping my voice low. He didn't waste time. "Stay inside. Lock the door. Don't approach them. I'll send a car." While I waited, the SUV's driver's side door cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to spill onto the asphalt. A shadow shifted inside, like someone leaning forward to get a better look at my room. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay still. Within 15 minutes, red and blue lights washed over the parking lot. The SUV's engine roared to life, and it peeled out before the patrol car even had a chance to block it. Holt called back minutes later. "We'll run the plates." Probably connected to Darren's debt. They were fishing, seeing if you're here, how alone you are, how easy it'd be to corner you. I hung up and leaned back against the wall, the motel suddenly feeling less like a refuge and more like a trap. They knew where I was now, and knowing was the first step to closing in. The morning after the SUV incident, I decided to change my routine. No breakfast at the cafe, no walk around the block, just coffee in my room and blinds half closed. I didn't want to give anyone a clear view of me coming or going. Around 9 a.m., I went into the small motel bathroom to shave. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was steam from the shower, but when I leaned closer, the faint smudge across the mirror spelled something unmistakable. Time's running out. The words were written in a greasy residue, the kind you'd get from tracing a finger dipped in oil or wax. My stomach tightened. Someone had been inside my room. I scanned the space. Nothing obvious was missing. My suitcase was still under the desk, my journal still on the chair. But the violation wasn't about theft. It was about sending a message. They could get to me anytime they wanted. I grabbed my phone and called Holt immediately. He didn't even try to hide the concern in his voice. "That's an escalation," he said. "We'll get a forensic team there. Don't touch the mirror. And Edgar, we might need to move you to a safer location." For the first time since it started, I considered it. I'd been holding my ground, refusing to be chased out of town by my son-in-law's mess. But this wasn't just Darren anymore. This was the kind of threat that lived in shadows and didn't mind stepping over lines. When I hung up, I sat on the bed, staring at the mirror through the open bathroom door. The words seemed to glow faintly in the morning light, a reminder that the clock was ticking, and I wasn't sure how many moves I had left. By noon, Holt arrived in person with 2 uniformed officers. He didn't waste time on small talk. "Pack your things," he said. "You're not staying here another night." I hesitated, my eyes flicking toward the bathroom. "You think they'll come back?" "They already have," he replied grimly. That message wasn't just a warning. It was a test. They wanted to see how quickly we'd react. If we leave you here, they'll try something bolder next time. I packed fast, the journal, the evidence bag, my clothes, and a small lockbox with documents I couldn't afford to lose. Holt's officers swept the room, checking under the bed, inside the closet, even in the ceiling tiles. One of them found the latch on the bathroom window had been pried loose. That's how they'd gotten in. We left through back exit. Holt's unmarked sedan waiting. As we pulled onto the main road, I glanced back at the motel. It looked ordinary again, just another roadside stop for weary travelers. But I knew better now. That room had been compromised. My presence there had been marked. Holt drove in silence for several miles before speaking. "I'm moving you to a safe house. Unlisted address. Only myself and 2 other officers will know you're there. You'll have a landline, not a cell, and you don't answer the door for anyone." I nodded, feeling the shift inside me. This was no longer about pride or standing my ground. It was about survival. As the miles rolled past, I wondered if Darren even understood what he'd set in motion, or if he was too far gone to care. Either way, the next move wouldn't be his. It would be mine. The safe house was nothing like home. A small, nondescript bungalow tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges. It smelled faintly of dust and coffee, and the furniture looked like it had been borrowed from a yard sale. But it was quiet, and for now, quiet was all I needed. 2 days passed without incident. No knocks, no strange cars, no messages scrawled in mirrors. I almost began to believe the distance had worked, until the phone rang. It wasn't Holt. The voice on the other end was low, deliberate. "You've cost us time, money, patience. This is your last chance to make it right." I didn't speak. I wanted every word to hang in the air, heavy enough for Holt's recording equipment, installed in the safe house, to catch. "You think the law will protect you?" The voice continued. "It won't. The only thing between you and what's coming is your willingness to pay up." My hand tightened around the receiver. "I'm not paying a cent for Darren's debts," I said evenly. "And if you come near me again, you'll find out just how quickly the law can move." A chuckle, slow, humorless, slid through the line. Then the click of disconnection. Within minutes, Holt was at the door. He'd heard everything through the live feed. "That," he said, "was exactly what we needed. Turns out, The voice belonged to a man already under investigation for illegal debt collection tied to the casino. My recorded call was enough to link him to Darren's case and to the threats. The arrest came the next morning. Darren, too, was picked up for fraud and conspiracy. As I stood in the safe house doorway, watching Holt's car disappear down the road, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not victory, not relief, freedom.